Well, more on your breaking news story in just a moment. But first, let's get an update on the situation in Zimbabwe, where negotiations have apparently deadlocked. Sources say President Robert Mugabe has agreed to step down, but only next year. ENCA's Thulasizwe Simelane is in Harare, and he joins us now live. Thulasizwe, by all accounts, it does seem that life is going on, despite all of this going on behind the scenes in Zimbabwe, all of these talks between the army and Robert Mugabe. Life continues on the streets of Harare.
Absolutely, Michelle. It's the juxtaposition of the usual and the highly unusual on the streets of Harare. I mean, where I'm standing, you can see the activity behind me. People going about their daily lives as per usual. One key notable thing, we're seeing a lot of the traders who are out on the streets, doing their trading. And this is important, of course, because by many's account, the absence of the Zimbabwe Republic police officers has sort of given traders and people like that an opportunity to breathe a little easier without, of course, facing a situation. One guy was telling me now that, by now they would have been asked for all sorts of bribes and payments or had their goods confiscated. So life continues as per usual. I've seen government cars moving about, private sector companies, their vehicles moving about in the city. But the unusual, the highly unusual that you do see, making our way to this intersection where we are, we actually drove past Munumutapa building and we saw the tanks that are parked, that are stationed there. I mean, it's a dramatic scene when you see military tanks stationed next to the seat of power in Zimbabwe, the office of the man who's until now been the most powerful man in Zimbabwe, President Robert Mugabe. You see those chains that are the tracks of the tanks firmly edged on the tarmac, on the roads, on the streets here in Harare. Let me quickly tell you about the hunger for news and information about what is happening with negotiations. So the newspapers are flying off the stands. Michelle, I've got a sampling here that I wanted to show you. This is the Daily News, an independent title. It leads with Dawn of a New Era. And there's a lot of people who are talking about that, who are talking in those terms, even going as far as to say this is almost like a second liberation. Whether or not, of course, that pans out, that remains to be seen from the ongoing negotiations. The Daily News also carrying a story about the former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, whose sacking seems to have brought this crisis to a head. Of course, reporting that he is back in Zimbabwe after he left, after he was sacked by President Robert Mugabe about 2 weeks ago. Let me quickly show you the other title that I wanted to show you. This is the Zimbabwe Independent. It has a story that says Mugabe exit plan talks deadlocked. And of course, there's also the Zimbabwe Herald, the state newspaper, just reporting that there's negotiations taking place between the president and leaders of the defense force.
Thulasizwe, are we still seeing this information vacuum where very little info is actually trickling down to ordinary citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. This is why there's so much hunger for the newspaper, the news titles that I was showing you now. I mean, the guys that are selling newspapers now, as I was going to get these two copies, they were telling me that newspapers are flying off the shelves. People are simply just grabbing, any piece of information that they can get. Social media is proving to be quite useful as well, of course, with its own pitfalls, because, I mean, the rumor mill in Zimbabwe is highly active. And this for me harks back to the days when I was here covering the negotiations that led to the formation of a government of national unity. Even then, there was a sort of information vacuum that was filled by rumor and speculation. It's no different. All sorts of scenarios that have been mapped out in the last 24, 48 hours, including talk about President Robert Mugabe agreeing in principle to leave as party president next month and possibly leave the presidency of the Republic next year. Nothing we can confirm, Michelle, just one of the many scenarios that are being thrown about.
Yeah, absolutely. Very difficult to confirm any of those scenarios at the moment. Well, thanks very much for that update. ENCA's Thulasizwe Simelane talking to us very literally from the streets of Harare.